every time I mention a toxic person online somewhere, somebody is in the comments getting upset because I called them toxic. The big debate, are people toxic or are they just doing toxic things? Even opened up towards there being no such thing as good and bad people in a conversation I had last week. So what's the point of it all? If there's no such thing as good and bad people, why are we even bothering trying? I ask all of this in this episode today, which is just me. And I go off on plenty of tangents. It is 35 minutes of ranting, pretty much, I'm sure. Although I do calm myself in different moments of it. But I fully break down in a lot of distance and a lot of chat of why I do think it's important that we label people as toxic when they're horrible. So look, sit back, grab the popcorn and get yourself ready, because I bloody enjoyed recording this episode, even if you don't enjoy listening to it. And I'll see you on the next one. Dysfunction is everywhere. In our families, in our cultures, and in our systems. And this is Dysfunctional, the podcast that helps you name the things that most people can't or won't see. Let's call it out, break it down, and maybe even start a bloody revolution. All right, you'll be pleased, I'm sure, to know that you're dealing with just me today. And that is because we had a late cancellation on an amazing guest that will still be coming in. I did speak to them, they're very poorly, and we decided that it was best to leave it and do it when they can be fully ready to do it. So that will be coming, that episode, but you're stuck with me for an episode today. And something that I was hyper fixated on last week, it's interesting actually. I've been talking recently about how I do get hyper fixated on certain things, right? I get like caught up in them, and last week the thing that I couldn't let go and that I sort of was going around the houses with was the idea that people are toxic. And it's just so interesting that when I say toxic person online, of all the things that I talk about and all the things that I say, and I get that I say some confronting things, and listen, I say shit I don't mean sometimes, right? But I get that I say stuff like that. Of all the stuff that I say, why do some people get so hung up on the idea that there's toxic people or that there's good and bad people? You know, this idea that we're all the same and we're all just trying our best. And ultimately, and I'm going to get into it today, I've made some notes here. I'm going to use them and just work through, see how long we're here, and talk about why I do think actually it's quite important to label people as we think we should be labeling them, and explore why people get triggered and by it and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, what I would say is that I believe that there is the main majority of people find themselves in this middle space where we're all good and bad, right? And we flutter between the two, and sometimes we're more towards being not very good or bad than we are to being good, right? I understand that that's where most of us live, but it's not all of us. And there's a group of people that I think is way larger than people want to admit. That doesn't mean that it's massive or the biggest group, or, you know, like, I don't want to over egg it and say that they're fucking everywhere, which by the way, I do sometimes say it. But that's more in jest. Most people are good and bad, but there's a big group of people, and it is larger than people make out, of people that are fucking horrible. And I just think that we should be more honest about it, you know? And I want to explore why people get so triggered about it. So that's where I'm going to start today, is why do people get uncomfortable when I say toxic people? You know, a lot of these people want to argue that people aren't toxic, they're just people doing toxic things, right? And in the end, ultimately, it's like semantical. It's like, does it fucking really matter? Like, call them whatever you want to call them. If you want to say people doing toxic things and they're not toxic people, fucking do that. But you only have to murder one person, and we're all happy to call people that do that a murderer if you do it once. It's the same with lots of things. You know, if you rape somebody, you're a rapist, right? And look, maybe people would argue that that's not the case. Maybe people would say, well, we should stop doing that too. Maybe they will. But what I want to know is why people are so triggered about it. Look, ultimately, maybe I should start here just quickly. I call people toxic people because I think it's just quicker than saying people that are doing toxic things. And two, if you repeatedly act in a certain way, I'm going to fucking, that's what you are. Like, we live in the human realm, right? As much as some people, I think, are verging on fucking spiritual psychosis, but actually what they're doing is just living a whole life in fancy dress of spirituality. Forget that we live in the fucking real world and that we're you know, I believe that maybe we are spiritual beings having a human existence. Maybe we are, but we're having a human existence. And so if you just look at everything through a spiritual lens, right, and ignore the human lens, you're fucking bypassing reality, all right? And you're lost. You're lost. So we need to be grounded in some truth sometimes. Often, we need to be grounded in the truth of the human experience. And I believe that we are defined by, as a human being, we are defined by our actions that we consistently take. We are defined by who am I, right? Like, who am I? Am I just a spiritual being floating through life with no control over what's happening? Am I? Or am I a dad, a brother, a son, a partner? Like, am I those things, right? And how do I define those things and whether I get to be them? I just think that that's the truth. So why do people get uncomfortable with it? And I've thought a lot about it because there are people that are like, I don't really think there are toxic people. You have a bit of a thing with them and they're like, yeah, all right, fair enough. If you want to call them toxic, I get it. But then there's other people that they can't leave it. And I appreciate that. I clearly can't leave it either because I'm about to do a whole fucking podcast on it. I'm in the middle of doing a whole podcast about it. So I sort of get that. So actually, maybe I should start off by saying why it triggers me. Why does it trigger me? Because it does. I get fucking activated. I get angry by people that do it. Look, one of the reasons that it triggers me is because I recognize that there's a lot of people out there, especially in the men's space, that talk about me together and they say that I'm keeping people in victim mindset because I'm like blaming other people. I'm not blaming anyone. It's not about blame. I'm talking about fucking truth. And if you were abused by somebody, then you are a victim, right? And if you want to pretend that you weren't, then you're bypassing. And actually, the way that you move through victimhood and you don't play the victim is by doing the fucking work and realizing the truth of what happened, which means admitting that you were a victim. And recognizing that it could impact you for the rest of your life. And that's something that you might have to navigate if you're going to live in truth. So there's one reason why it triggers me, because I do feel like I get a bad rap. And look, I make out I don't give a fuck about what the men in the men's space think of me. And there is one part of me that doesn't. And then there's another part that wants them all to like me. And it's like, I've lived my whole life being like I am, asking, confronting questions, looking at things differently, not conforming. I've lived my whole life like that, and I've been ostracized as a result of it many times over and over again. And it does it sometimes feels a bit shit that you have to choose. Do I just conform and be what everybody wants me to be? Or do I continue being no, I'm going to fucking be who I am and stand up for what I believe? You do flirt between the two. So there's another reason. Why else does it trigger me? Why does it trigger me when people get funny about me calling them toxic? Look, I think as somebody that's been on the receiving end of somebody who is fucking toxic and horrible, I hate when people want to downplay that. When people can't, when it's too horrible and too uncomfortable for people to really just go, you know what, toxic, fucking horrible, nasty, dare I say, evil people exist. Yeah, like if you want to float around and pretend they don't, good for you. But for the people that are on the receiving end of that abuse and horror and this, whatever you want to call it, I think they should be allowed to use whatever fucking terminology they want. And if that makes you uncomfortable, you fucking do some work. Because imagine how uncomfortable it is to be on the receiving end of it. And look, I know that a lot of people that are on the receiving end of it, I'm going to get into this in a minute, are people that have experienced it themselves too. But just because they've experienced something too, it doesn't mean that they get to define somebody else's experience. So let me be clear. I don't think anybody has to call people toxic. If you want to call them toxic people and believe that they're all love and light, but they're just acting from a place of trauma, then that's great. I think you should do that. I just don't think you should push it on other people. Am I pushing my terminology on other people? No, I think you should call people whatever you fucking want. Ultimately, maybe I'll come back to that at the end. So why do people get uncomfortable with it? And I've written a few things that I'm just going to riff off here. I think there's a massive fear of self-reflection, right? It's hard for me to go out every day online regularly in the way that I do and talk about this. I'm fighting a cause that I believe in, right? Which is why I do it every day. And the reason it's hard is because, we all have toxic traits. Everybody does, right? We all do things that we're not proud of, that don't make us feel good. Still, now, regular, not as regularly as I once did, but they happen, yeah? This happens. And so it's confronting to be like, yeah, I think some people are fucking toxic and horrible. So, because to admit that, then I've got to be able to own my shit. And, there's something in that. How do I own my shit? How do I own the mistakes and the fact that I'm not perfect and that I do mess up and do things that do hurt people and all that sort of stuff? How do I own that? I don't own it by going, well, we're all just doing our best. That's not accountability, man. It's not accountability. I own it by going, yeah, you know what? I did that thing and that fucking ain't good enough. How do I be better? How do I be better? So I think there's a lot of like, if we just pretend everybody's like they are, I won't have to look at myself. I won't have to pretend that there's some things about myself that make me feel uncomfortable. I actually think that toxic and horrible people never do that. They never look at themselves anyway. So, you're not toxic and horrible if you reflect and you want to take accountability. We're obsessed as a culture with moral relativism, right? What do I mean by that? Where we just say that everything's just perspective, This is one thing that people throw at me all of the time. We all sit somewhere on the scale, which we do, but who gets to draw the line? Who gets to decide what toxic is? And it's quite an easy answer. I mean, there's nuance to it, but it's quite an easy answer. The reason we have a court system where you have lawyers, the reason we have a jury so that you have a fair trial, is because in order to live in a collective society, we have to have parameters and boundaries of which we can live in. That's why, so like, you don't get to fucking murder somebody and walk the streets if we catch you, right? You don't get to do that because we've collectively decided that murder is bad. So if you do it, you will get your freedom taken away, right? There will be a punishment, right? Yes, there might be some rehabilitation if you're willing to rehabilitate. But if you murder someone for whatever reason, from accidental, when, and I really feel for the people that punch someone once and it ends up killing them. I have so much compassion for them. Do I think they should live the rest of their life being seen as a murderer, and being labeled as a murderer? No, probably not. But a senseless killing where you go out and senselessly kill someone, I don't really give a fuck why you did it. I've got no bones with calling you a murderer, perhaps for the rest of your life, irrespective of if you rehabilitate and stop doing that. Right? There's consequences to your actions. There's lines and parameters that we need to draw as a society in order for us to live together in a collective society. So who gets to decide the lines? Well, that's why we have elected democratic governments, so that we can get the lines together. Now, there's a whole other conversation, one that I've had a million times, about whether they do that correctly and rightly, and whether we should even be giving them the power anymore to decide those things. But that is essentially what happens. So when you say who gets to draw the line, well, collectively, we all do that together, right? It's not just a matter of perspective, you know. There's nuance, of course there is. But if you murder somebody accidentally through one punch on a fight on a night out, and I can have a lot of compassion for that person, and a lot more compassion for that person than I perhaps can the senseless murderer, although I can even have compassion for how somebody becomes a senseless murderer. I can have compassion, and you're going to get your life taken away from you. And there's going to be certain things that you may never be able to do for the rest of your life, because we have to have lines. We have to have lines, and we draw them somewhere. So collectively, we have to understand that it's not all just perspective, man. You know? You should go to jail if you get in a fight and you punch somebody and you kill them. You should go to jail for a long time for that. And if that worries you, and I'm somebody who got in a lot of fights when I was younger, so, you know, you could argue I'm not the same as them people by more luck than judgment, and that's right. But if you get in a fight and you punch someone, no, you might kill them. You might kill them. So live your life accordingly. You don't get to do it and then go, well, you know, I didn't mean to kill. Like, unfortunately, you don't. Or fortunately, maybe. And I am getting into the nuance here, because it's a fucking nuanced conversation, and you know, there is a grey area, but we still draw lines. So then when we bring it down to an individual level, who gets to draw the lines? Well, the individual that's been abused. Like, I talk a lot about toxic parents. If you want to bring that in, like, who gets to draw the line? Who gets to draw the line, and what is toxic and what isn't? Well, you're fucking my children. My children do. Now listen, I'm sure estrangement happens for a bunch of different reasons, and it's often complex, and sometimes it's maybe it is the kids to do with it, but like, many kids are abused, and I believe them. Someone even said to me, I'm really surprised that you straight away believe a child when they tell you that they were abused. And I'm like, that is mental that I even need to answer that. That is mental. The worst thing about being an abused is that we live in a society that wants you to prove it. And that gives so much fucking power. And again, I know that's nuanced, but it gives so much power to the abuser. So much power. So yeah, this kind of relativism that we're on about, it's, you know, I don't like it. The next reason I think people do it, that I've written here, is the illusion of spiritual superiority. People that think, oh, I just see everyone as love and light. Sometimes people just do it from a fucking place of spiritual arrogance. It's like, oh, you see everyone as love and light. Oh, do you? Yeah, what? Because you're so spiritual and you've done so much work. And like, I get people say that to me all the time, you know, one day when you've done the work and you've come through it, you'll realize that everyone's just doing their best. And I think, oh, fuck off with the thinking that you're... If you think it, cool, man. If you think it, cool. If you think that everyone is love and light, cool. But don't act like you think that because you're more spiritual than me. Because I'll just come back at you and say that you do it because you're trying to be more spiritual, and it's just emotional avoidance dressed up as spirituality. And I see it all the time, man. I see it all the fucking time. I'm open to a conversation about it, but in the end, I think that people just land at this place where they go, oh, you just don't get it, you know. When you've done a bit more work, you will. And I ain't having it. And the it's all trauma narrative removes accountability. You know, I have to be really careful that we're like, oh, you know, when we say things like, look, there is a time and a place when it is in the right energy and the right context to be like, look, we're all trying to do our best, man. We're all just doing our best with what we've been given. You know, there is an energy and a time when that's so true, man. And then sometimes it's not true, is it? Sometimes it's not true. You know, when we take these extreme cases of certain people, it's not true that they were doing their best. You can't argue that. And, you know, some people say to me, you know, it's all trauma, and if you were that person, you would be doing exactly as they were. No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. And I don't think a lot of you listening would be. If you were in Jimmy Savile's shoes and lived the exact same life as he did, like, would you be that? Nah. No, I wouldn't. And I'm fucking concerned that there's people out there that think that they would. Now, if you had his brain, then, or whatever, and you was exactly the same, a clone of him, then you would be like him. A fucking evil bastard who doesn't deserve to walk amongst us. That's the truth, isn't it? What? I'm sort of laughing because I think it is the truth. And you know, like, without the admittance that hate exists, there is no love. I don't want to get too cheesy, but it's the truth, right? Light doesn't exist if there's no such thing as dark. It just is, right? So we need to get important, right? And why does it matter? Because if you've grown up with somebody particularly, or you're in a relationship with somebody that's cruel or incapable of love, like when we say a parent is just doing their best, we teach people that love can look like that. And that's not true. Some of the way people are treated by a child when they are by their parent, when they're a kid, and even when they're an adult, is not love. It's not a loving person doing their best. It's not love. We need to be clear about that. That's not love. That's not what love looks like. Unfortunately, some people grow up with parents that are incapable of loving them. And when we go, they're not toxic. They're just people doing the best, you know, acting from a place of their trauma. No, they're not. They're not. They're people who are not very nice and incapable of love. I think we should be really clear about that. We should teach, you know, we should let people understand and learn that. That's not what love is. That's not what love is. If we want to break cycles, if we want to make less horrible people, we need to go, that's not what love is. Because they'll spend their whole life trying to fucking find out what love is, but it ain't that. So I think we need people to fight for this a bit. We need somebody to go, no, I fucking ain't having it. Like, I do think that. And it baffles me a little bit. You know, and there'll be people that go, oh, you seem angry, you know. Oh, I fucking am. I am angry. But and look, I'm angry when I talk about this. And this is the thing, I think you have to be careful, is that just because I'm angry when you see me on social media, it's because on my social media, I'm talking about difficult conversations, and I'm often talking about abuse. I'm talking about horrible parents, people that were horrible to people. And that makes me angry. In my day-to-day life, I'm not thinking about this, and I'm not talking about it. I'm not angry, unless you play football with me. And even then, I'd say I've calmed down a lot as I've got older. But, like, I'm not. This is healthy anger. I'm talking about a subject that makes me angry. I don't live my life angry. All right? Like this. I don't. I'm fucking chill, man. I'm chill. So let's talk about accountability and why good and bad people do exist. Take me, I'm a dad, right? I'm a dad. When I leave this world, when I'm gone, do I want my kids to go, you know what? I think he was a good man. He had a lot of trauma. And he did the best he could with the tools that he had, you know. Yeah. Do I want that? Or do I want them to be like, you know what? He was a fucking good man. He went through some stuff. Faced it, you know, he wasn't perfect. And he made some mistakes. But, man, he was a good man. He fucking tried, you know? Tried to do good things. That's what I want. Surely that's accountability. And by the way, I ain't a good dad all the time. I'm a human being. I mess up, right? I've had a lot of trauma, but what separates that from a toxic and horrible person is the accountability piece, the willingness to go, I know there's good and bad people, and I don't want to be a bad one. I want to be a good one, so I'm going to work hard. I'm slightly untrusting of people that don't think they're good and bad people and think they're all just trying their best. Because I'm like, well, is that somebody I'd want in my corner? Or do I want someone who's like, I fucking want to be good? I don't know. Well, who would you want in your corner? Who would you want fighting for you? And I do think that, like, we have a bit of an issue now where what I believe is right doesn't get fought for anymore, because it's a lot of people pushing, if you want to get political about it, on the left are triggered by anger. And I consider myself left, right? Are triggered by anger. So we don't get anyone fight for us. You don't have anyone fight. And I do think that's an issue. When you look at the protests that go on across the world, the left versus the right, doesn't matter what you think about what they're protesting for, but the left lack people sometimes that are like, we need someone to fucking fight for us. The idea that we're all the same and that there's no good and bad is comforting, but it's not true, is it? I don't want you to lump me together with some of the people out there. I'm not like some of the people out there. I'm trying to look here for a quote I wanted to share with you. And it's from Paul Scholes' daughter, and I forgot to get it up, so I'm going to get it up in front of me here. Yeah, here we go. So she's talking, just while I find it here, she's talking about Paul Scholes. If you don't know, Paul Scholes has got at least more than one children, because there's this one. They're adults now, but his son is non-verbal and has some disability. And his daughter's talking about, he's talked about it recently on a podcast. It's amazing. You should go and listen to it. But yeah, he talked about it, and so his daughter's talking about him and about how amazing he is. And where does he say it? Yeah, here we go. So she's talking about her dad, right? She's an adult now, I guess in certainly late teens at earliest. She says, again, I look at you. She's talked loads of stuff up until this point. This is about 3 slides in. She says, again, I look at you, and not only are you everything I want to be in an athlete, but your character and how you carry yourself is admirable, and everything I want to be. You're a normal person, so unbothered by outside noise, so unfazed by the media and how the world is now. If anyone met you, they wouldn't have a clue the life you've lived. They've seen a genuinely kind, polite, caring person, and you don't care about people who don't matter. And out of everything, that is most valuable thing I have learned from you. People naturally dislike you if you're different, if you don't stick to the bullshit guidelines of how everything should be done. People naturally, but you have shown me I can be whoever I want and truly not care what anyone thinks. I love you for that. And she's just this outpouring of what she says about him, right? You don't care about people that don't matter, because there's a lot of, you will have a lot of connections in your life. You'll meet a lot of people in your life. If you're a parent, you'll be a parent. If you're not a parent, you'll have loving connections. I'm sure most people do, right? There are, of course, cases where people can't for whatever reason, but most people do, yeah. And how do you want to be seen by them people? Like, do you want to be seen as a good person? Do you want to be seen as a good wife, husband, partner? Do you? Or do you just think that we're all the fucking same? I'm serious, man. Because I read that and it makes me emotional from someone's daughter. And I want to be that. I want my kids to speak about me like that. And if I want my kids to speak about me like that, I've got to fucking be accountable. And this is the point. So why are we so like, listen, I know some people can't make it. They don't make it. I'm not saying I'm fucking better than anybody else, but for my own personal gain, for my own personal experience, I want to be that. And I was just really moved by what she said. And I think particularly that she was saying that we've all got a limited amount of empathy, yeah. Who are you giving it to? Who are you giving it to? Because empathy without boundaries, I'm going to talk about that in a second, but it's self-destructive. So you better give it to somebody that deserves it. Otherwise you're going to run out. Yeah, and I've written it here. We can't pour empathy endlessly into everyone. Some people will weaponize it. Some people will use it against you. So we need to go. That person's fucking toxic and horrible. Don't give them your empathy. And if you've never met anyone like that, good for you. But I don't think you'll be listening to this podcast if that was the case. And I've talked a lot already probably about compassion versus consequence. So I'm not going to go there again. And I want to talk, if I can, a little bit about shame, because I think that what these kind of people that sit often on a spiritual high top, they want a shameless society. We need shame. There's healthy shame. We don't want toxic shame. Toxic shame is a little bit different. Toxic shame, when you become shame-based, and you're just ashamed of who you are, that's a problem. But you also don't want to experience no shame. Shame is what makes you feel guilty about things and want to put it right. And what these people, where there's no good and bad and everybody floats around being the same, what they want is a shameless society where we're all just the same and spiritual beings, right? And so, like, why would anybody ever feel guilty about anything if we didn't have a certain amount of shame, healthy shame? Toxic shame keeps us small and afraid to take up space. And shamelessness is just as destructive because it allows cruelty and it allows you to be who you are, whoever you want to be, with fucking no accountability. Because empathy without boundaries is self-destructive, both on a personal level and a societal level. We need parameters, we need lines, that's why we have them. So who gets to decide who's toxic? We all do, together. We've all done bad things. But if you're somebody who's just never willing to accept and take accountability for them, I'm going to think you're a fucking horrible person. Toxic, horrible. I might just call you a prick. Like, the point I'm making is, it doesn't really matter what we call you, but if your actions are always that and you never take accountability, you don't get the grace of still being seen through the lens of love and light. You don't. That's consequences of your actions, man. That's consequences. And I've been there. I've been on the end of them consequences and them actions when people don't want to be around me because I'm nothing but a dick. I've been there. I've done that. And they were right, by the way, to not be around me when I was a dick and I was toxic and I was horrible. People had the right to not be around me. Fucking right they did. And if I drink again, I tell my kids, if I drink again and I go back down that path, then I will be a toxic, horrible man, and you should get as far away from me as you possibly can. I don't want to go, if I drink again, I'm just doing my best, I don't want that. And again, look, I know there's nuance when it comes to addiction, and some people don't get out of addiction, and I don't know what makes me different to them so far. I don't know, but there's consequences, and we have to have consequences. And I'm going to summarize here and finish by saying, I believe in a victim-focused approach. I believe the long game, we get rid of toxic and horrible people by having a victim-first approach. And if someone's been abused by their parent or anybody and they want to call that person toxic, let them. Support them. We should mirror that language for them. We should let them have their space, not sit on a spiritual high top and think, well, one day you'll see them through the lens of love, right? We shouldn't do that. We should go into the victim, You can't, on the one hand, share a fucking meme about jumping into the hole with them, right, and being with them, and then on the other hand, be like, yeah, but they're not, nobody's toxic, they're all love and light. Go and be with the fucking victims. That's what we should do. Healing doesn't start with fucking bypassing the reality and the truth. It starts in the truth. So important. And I'll finish by saying that, a lot of people say hurt people. That's not true, is it? It's not true that hurt people. Sometimes hurt people just hurt themselves, or sometimes hurt people allow hurt people to continue to fucking hurt them. So it's too simplistic to say hurt people. I understand where it comes from, and there's contexts where we might say that, but ultimately hurt people don't have to hurt people, and we need accountability. And if you hurt people, you don't get to use your hurt as an excuse. You might recognize it as the reason, and you probably should recognize it as the reason, and then you should take accountability. And if you don't, then you may find yourself ostracized from society, because good and bad people exist, and your actions and who you are and how you show up in the world will gauge whether you are one of the good or the bad people. And I know that most of us sit somewhere in the middle, but I want to be up near that good end of the scale if I can, in the eyes of my children, my family, and the people that I care about the most. And I am the one who has to take accountability and some power over that to decide what that is. I don't get to just go, we're all doing our best and we're all love and light. Again, there's contexts when that does work, and when that does make sense, and then there's contexts when it fucking doesn't. If you've ever been made to feel like you're crazy for calling somebody toxic, you ain't. If you're ever made to feel like you're in the wrong because you hate somebody who was horrible to you, you're not in the wrong. And ultimately, if somebody is fucking horrible, I would argue the most loving thing that you can do for them, yourself, and anyone else is to walk away. And I just think that's the truth. Well, this has been fun. I feel like it was I'm just looking at the time down there, 35-minute rant. I want to take a breath with me, because I'm going to take 3 now. In through the nose. And out through the mouth. And again, in through the nose. And out through the mouth. Last one, in through the nose and out through the mouth. It's alright to get angry, you know. Some people do that. Sometimes when you're triggered, it's because somebody's a fucking idiot. And that's okay. And I'm sorry if you can keep hearing my tummy rumble. I've not yet eaten, and it's 1:10. I'm sending you all big love. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, man, get in touch with me. Tell me how wrong I am, or tell me how right I am, or tell me how good my hair is. But as always, I know one thing to be absolutely true. I'm Josh Connolly, and this was definitely dysfunctional. I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.